One of the things that I'd like to just ask to start with, just to begin, because most of the time you'll be speaking in Michif, is just to tell me how it is that you come to be fluent Michif speakers, where you grew up, family. I'll start here. Watch me. Don't watch me point with my lips. How can I?
Who are you asking to?
Well, both of you, but who wants to go first?
Go ahead.
Okay. Thanks. For myself personally, I've always spoke Michif, and I was born with the Michif language. Like when I was in my mother's womb, I heard the Michif language because that was essentially our first language.
Right.
And it was just a normal thing for me. Like I didn't know there was any other language.
Until you were how old?
And then, we'd have visitors that might come from, like we lived in a community which was predominantly French Métis community. And if we go to town shopping, there would be French speaking and a lot of Michif speaking. So we knew there was the French in the community. So I heard French. And since just about 50% of our language, the Michif language, is French, like the nouns are in French, then I knew I wasn't lost with, and I got to learn the French language very, very, very easily.
So you speak French as well?
And I also speak French, but not only French, because the people back home, the Métis people, were known as people that were very diverse in all languages, because it was just a normal thing in life, because you grew up either in a community where there might have been reserves close by, and then you learned those languages also, or they had to speak different languages to survive, and they were known as the interpreters and the translators when treaties were made and when treaties were signed. So our Métis people were always very diverse in languages. I know some people back home that spoke Dakota, which is the Sioux language. They spoke Saulteaux, they spoke Cree, they spoke French, Métis French, and Michif, and Cree, like Plains Cree. And I speak all those languages.
Yeah, I knew people
understand.
that spoke French, Michif, Cree, Saulteaux, and English. So, they're all related languages, but that, except for English. But five, yeah.
Michif was our first language.
That's what you spoke
And that's what I spoke at home. And my mom, she lives in Brandon. She'll be 102 in June. And it was our family language. It was also our commercial language. It was also a ceremonial language. When you prayed in Michif. So it was no problem for me to...
Did you have a big family?
My mom would have had, or she did have 13 children, but there was 9 living.
9?
Yeah, so I grew up in a fair-sized family.
Older people living with the family? Grandparents?
Well, my grandparents actually lived on the same little farm that we lived on.
Oh, neighbors.
And my grandparents were actually, more so than my mother, my grandparents were my teachers. They taught me all their culture, the traditions, the stories, the folklore, the legends. I learned all from my grandparents. And they were the ones that also in that generation spoke highly of Louis Riel and the Métis people who were part of the resistance, part of the movement of the Métis people. And that's where I heard of Louis Riel.
Who were your grandparents? What were their names?
My grandparents, like my maternal grandparents, were Jean-Baptiste Leclerc and Flora Lépine. That was her maiden name. But she used to say Lépine. She says, my name is Lépine, it's not Lépine. Because she felt it was more francophone when you said Lépine, but it was Lépine that was more Michif.
So that's how they pronounced it?
That's how she pronounced her, and her dad pronounced it Lépine also.
Oh, really? Well,
and those were my maternal. My paternal grandparents were John Fleury, and my grandmother was a Vermette. Rosanna Vermette was her name. And so I also learned genealogy. I was very, very much involved in genealogy. My family today, they'll ask me who was Grandpa's parents and who were the relatives and what did they do. And I guess I was a young boy. They used to call me a kid that was very curious. But my curiosity led me to where I am today, where I'm one of the people that know the legends, the stories, the history, and the folklore of our people, because I was curious. But then another thing we would talk about is those kind of things are, you're gifted. Like, we believe that people were gifted with certain things in life. And I was gifted to be a historian or a folklorist or people that knew legends and stuff. And there was people like we were talking about with Gilbert, like yesterday we were talking and this morning, and we were talking about different things about how the people became to be talented and skilled in their areas. Like some people were horse people. Some people knew good horses.
That's a gift.
Yeah, that's a gift.
Yeah.
And some were dog people. The dog. One time you used dogs for hunting, for trapping, and they were the means of transportation. So those were people. There was also people that were the storytellers, the people that told legends, and there was the medicine people. Like if you were sick, people would say, "Well, go see that individual. That person knows medicines." And certain people knew certain medicines for certain ailments. They were herbalists. They knew roots, and they knew the ways of healing. And like my mom's mother, she was one of those people.
My grandma too.
Yeah, and there was also spirituality involved in when you went digging medicine or when you were giving medicine to people. There was spirituality involved. You had to pray. It wasn't the person. My grandma used to say, "I'm not the person that's healing you. It's God. It's a spiritual thing." So those were the kind of things that they related. Because my grandmother also told us as young people, we were God-given people, and we had a God-given language, and God created us. So those are the kind of things. But like when we're talking in Michif, those kind of things are. You can highlight more things in Michif in your own language, and you can be more creative and artistic when you're starting to talk about who you are and what you're all about and about your way of life.
Is that right?
And I could just feel it here.
Yeah.
I can feel the emotions when I start talking about those things. You kind of feel tight in the throat, and you feel the hair going up in the back of your neck, and you know you're with it. You know, and those. I think that's the thing about being Michif. Yeah. Well.
Well, I guess the only difference between Norman and I was we were like more like gypsies. We moved around a lot.
Right.
You know, like my dad worked for farmers mostly. That's all he ever worked was for farmers. And my grandmother was with us. My grandpa died before I don't remember my grandpa, my dad's dad. But my grandma was with us. Her name was Helen, and her maiden name was St. Pierre.
All right. Okay.
And my grandfather was Abraham. And on my mother's side, well, my grandpa was Louis Flamont.
Okay.
And Rosen Henry was my grandmother.
Oh, Henry.
Henry was her.
Okay.
That was my grandmother.
Well, it's just Métis history right in these names.
We traveled around a lot, and from Yorkton. Well, I was born in Yorkton, and where it was straight Michif community. Everybody spoke Michif. Nobody spoke English. Everybody spoke Michif there. And when we left there to go around working, we came back in the 50s because that's the only place I had to go to school. We weren't allowed to go to school anywhere else. We couldn't get to school anywhere else. And that's when we started school in the 50s, when I started school. And, our only mode of travel was horses and wagon. And like Norman mentioned, they were gifted. My dad was gifted in fixing wagons when they had a breakdown. They'd have a breakdown, and he'll find a way to fix them. Harnesses, mending his harnesses, and doctoring the horses. Because horses did get sick too sometimes, eh? But he'd never get a vet, I never knew of such thing as a vet. He did it all himself. A horse had a bad cut or something, he'd go to a slough and get some, whatever he gathers there, wraps it around the horse, and that was it.
You could heal
The horse
it.
was okay, the horse was healed. Mm-hmm. And he was real good at that, and he spoke 7 different languages fluently, eh? 7? He spoke French fluently from Quebec, the Quebec French, he spoke it fluently. And different, like the Cree, he spoke Cree, and a lot of languages from the States, different Indian dialects.
Yeah.
He spoke 7 different languages.
See, I think that's almost hard for a person growing up now to think of, because like me, I speak 1. You know, and compared to, say, our long ago people, not even that long ago.
Well, I speak one language too, real good.
Good.
The only language I could speak good is Michif.
That's still your first?
That's my first language. And my second language, I guess, is English, because all I've ever spoken was Michif. Even today, as long as I can find a Michif-speaking person, that's all I'll talk is Michif. I won't talk English.
Do you think in Michif?
I'm pretty well, I do.
You think in Michif?
I think in Michif.
Okay,
regardless what I do, it's always in Michif. And, you know, because sometimes it is hard for me. I sit on some commissions and, you know, everybody talks English. They all speak English and all well-educated people. And there I am thinking my Michif. You know, my mind is Michif, eh?
You have to translate all the time?
I got to translate it. I got to translate all the time. And when I started school in Yorkton, after that, well, you know, that's where we settled. Then we didn't move around so much. We just go out and go work in the summertime and then come back, same place. You know, during the holidays, we'd go to work. And I left home quite early in life, went on my own, went to the States, you know, hiked around the country.
All right.
You know, but just being a wild kid, you know, not really interested in nothing but, you know, having a few drinks, having a lot of fun. That's all I ever thought about. You know, work enough to get a few bucks so you can go on to the next party.
Yeah, well, I think there's a few of you.
Yeah. But I've quit. I very seldom have a drink. Now I have a drink now and again. Maybe once, twice a year I'll have a couple of drinks. And I quit smoking years ago, so.
You're just a good guy
actually,
now.
I'm getting to be a good boy now. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. Maybe it's too late, but
It's never too late.
Never too late.
Where did you learn the stories?
From my grandma, actually. I learned the stories, but the hunting I learned from my dad. Mm-hmm. The hunting. I used to go with Dad when I was just a little kid. You know, as long as she didn't go too far. I'd go and part ways, and then I'd be able to go home. As long as I can see the house, then he'd let me go home alone.
All right.
But I used to go with him. As I grew older, I went farther and farther with him. And he taught me all about hunting, because I used to hunt a lot, too. You know, I trapped a lot and hunt a lot. And, you know, I used to snare everything. Rabbits and squirrels. You know, we used to sell them. Mm-hmm. So that's where we got our money. You get even 2 cents a squirrel or something. That was still money to us.
Yeah, back then it meant something.
Yeah, it meant something.
You get something with a penny.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You were able to go in a store with 5 cents and buy something. Actually buy something, you know. Not like today.
That's different today.
Oh, yeah, today is different. And I learned the stories from them. And when in our travels, you know, we used to camp in the roadlands, eh? Mm-hmm. Wherever there was a nice slough, because water was good all over. You hit a slough, the water was good to drink.
You could just drink it like that?
You could just drink it like that.
Wow.
Today you can't do it, eh? You kind of just strain it a bit, and then it's good to drink. You can't do that today, but, you know, and then other people, somehow or another, they'd find each other. And then they'd stay there for about 2-3 days, just camp there. And that's where the stories would come in. You know, stories would come in then.
See, like years ago, there was no ways of, the media, we didn't have the media that we have today. There was no television, there was no radio. No. We never had any radio, or we never had any television. So when people visited, they'd tell each other the stories about, or just things that happened in the communities that they came from. So-and-so got married, so-and-so had, you know, children.
So and good visit.
Good visit. And I remember as a young child, if somebody came to visit, we were so excited to see people come to visit.
Yeah.
We were looking forward to, and in wintertime, especially when my uncle came, well, then we knew there was something coming, because the dog again would bark, or the dog would look. They knew there was somebody coming, and the dog gave a different bark and a different personality than he would if it was me or us coming.
Stranger,
home.
yeah.
He knew when there was a stranger.
Where did you learn the stories?
From my grandma, actually. I learned the stories, but the hunting I learned from my dad. Mm-hmm. The hunting. I used to go with Dad when I was just a little kid. You know, as long as she didn't go too far. I'd go and part ways, and then I'd be able to go home. As long as I can see the house, then he'd let me go home alone.
All right.
But I used to go with him. As I grew older, I went farther and farther with him. And he taught me all about hunting, because I used to hunt a lot, too. You know, I trapped a lot and hunt a lot. And, you know, used to snare everything, rabbits and squirrels. You know, we used to sell them.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where we got our money. You get even 2 cents a squirrel or something. That was still money to us.
Yeah, back then it meant something.
It meant something.
You get something with a penny.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You were able to go in a store with 5 cents and buy something. Actually buy something, you know. Not like today. That's
for today.
Oh, yeah, today is different. And I learned the stories from them. And when we used, in our travels, you know, we used to camp in the roadlands, eh? Mm-hmm. Wherever there was a nice slope, water was good all over. You hit a slope, the water was good to drink.
You could just drink it like
that?
that?
You could just drink it like that.
Wow.
Today you can't do it, eh? You kind of just strain it a bit and then it's good to drink. You can't do that today, but, you know, and then other people, somehow or another, they'd find each other. And then they'd stay there for about 2-3 days, just camp there. And that's where the stories would come in. You know, stories would come in then.
See, like years ago, there was no ways of, the media, we didn't have the media that we have today. There was no television, there was no radio. We never had any radio or we never had any television. So when people visited, they'd tell each other the stories about, or just things that happened in the communities that they came from. So-and-so got married, so-and-so had, you know, children.
So
and
good visit.
Good visit. And I remember as a young child, if somebody came to visit, we were so excited to see people come to visit.
Yeah.
We were looking forward to, and in wintertime, especially when my uncle came, well, then we knew there was something coming because the dog again would bark or the dog would look. They knew there was somebody coming. And the dog gave a different bark and a different personality than he would if it was me or us coming home. He knew when there was a stranger. And the horses, you could hear the chains from the harness, or you can hear the bells. But my uncle used to come and visit us, and then we'd sit down and visit, and we'd talk about things. There was always something to talk about, always things to talk about. Or he was a great one. This is my mom's brother, the only brother, and they always hosted dances or parties. So he'd say, "We're having a dance. We're coming to invite you to come on Saturday. There's a dance at home." And that's how the news went around. And there were some people around our community that moved around a lot. They were the people that would go around visiting. Mm-hmm. They were visitors. So when they came to your place, they tell you about so-and-so. And that's how the news got around. And it was so interesting, you know, because you knew when people were coming, you'd learn something, you'd have a good visit. And if they were going to stay too long, it was nothing to throw a blanket on the floor if there wasn't enough beds, which there was normally not enough beds. And the person would sleep beside the stove if he had to keep warm. And there was always room. There was hospitality. We always had
didn't matter.
Good hospitality. There was you didn't, and there was no such thing as a telephone, so I couldn't warn you I was coming. So just whenever somebody came, they were there, and you took it for granted that they were either going to stay for a day or a week.
Or a week, yeah.
And if they have to, they'd stay longer. And and I don't know how we did it, but we were able to accommodate a lot of people in our homes. And there was always, those people were also willing to help. If you were doing chores, they'd be out there to help you do chores. If you're going to go for a load of wood, they'd go with you and cut a load of wood, because they didn't come dressed up in a three-piece suit normally. You were dressed up for the weather, for the season. And if you were going to go out there trapping or hunting, they were gone with you also. So like people are always prepared for whatever. It was seasonal, and they were prepared for the venture that you were going to introduce to them. If there was time to butcher pigs or whatever, they were there, they would help you. It was milking time, they would help you also. So
so you earned your way.
Equal.
Everybody was equal then, eh? Because I think that's what it made it so nice to live those days, because not like today. Those days everybody was happy. Mm-hmm. They all got along really well, you know.
Métis people are known as happy people.
Yeah, and they were happy and joyful. I remember when somebody come to visit, like especially my auntie and uncle, like Louis Fleury and my aunt Mary Fleury. They were like the musicians in their family. The Theron Fleury, the NHL player. Well, he's my first cousin's boy. And his grandparents were very joyful, and they were the musicians. So when they'd come at home, and the first thing you'd know, there was the fiddle was going, they were tuning up, the guitar was going. Nobody didn't say, well, we're going to have a dance.
Kitchen parties.
And it was a kitchen party, and the music was on, and they were jigging, and that's how people shared their, actually, their way of being able to do dances. It was their teaching. Like, those were the teachings. Anything you done were specifically teachings. That's how I learned, because they taught us things, not directly, but indirectly. But you were supposed to be actually always paying attention to what's going on. And if you didn't pay attention, you lost out. And that was your own fault. Like when you were going hunting, for instance. I remember going hunting with my grandfather as a little boy. And he'd trap and he'd snare rabbits at the same time. So every morning we'd pick up rabbits in the snares. And I was just a little kid. And there was this rabbit in the snare and it was still alive. So I thought, as being a young boy, well, pet rabbit. So I grabbed this rabbit, and Grandpa said, no, Shim, he said, grandson. He said, you don't do that. Because he said, you'll kill the spirit of our hunt if you abuse that animal. God gave us those animals for us to eat, for our survival. So right away I seen him take this little rabbit, and he kind of put his thumb and his finger underneath the rib cage and dislocated the heart of the little rabbit. Put him out of his misery.
Die instantly.
Die instantly. So you did that.
So they knew how to show mercy.
He showed mercy. You'd never, and he taught me that lesson. It was a spiritual lesson. It was a way of hunting, but it was a way of saying to you, those things were provided by God, and you're supposed to take life only for survival, and you kill with mercy killing. And that's what it was. And as a little boy, I saw that. But he also told me, he said, grandson, this is the way we do things. And then I remember, like now we're talking about different things, eh? Like we're talking about hunting rights, for instance, for the Métis people. Well, for me, hunting rights are fine and dandy, but if you don't know the conservation rules and laws of the land, what's the sense of having hunting rights? And that's why
it doesn't just mean going bang around.
No, like you have to have co-management with conservation. Like, as far as I'm concerned, I want to teach my son and my daughter to hunt at the right time, because there's migratory laws. There's times when the birds are having their young, where the animals are having their young. I remember when they'd come and visit at home on Sundays, we would go hunting. Like we would just say, well, we're going to go get a deer or 2 deer. But if it wasn't the right time, my grandma and grandpa would say, look at you boys, it's not time to hunt now. They'd say, they're having their little ones, so you don't go now. And it was the same thing with the ducks. They would eat duck eggs and mud hen eggs when they used to travel. They would always leave 1 or 2 eggs in the nest. They would never take them all. And that was, again, conservation, and that was heart feeling, the feelings for the land and for the birds and everything that was provided to us by the Creator. Like those were spiritual things.
You're looking after it?
And looking after the land, it will look after you. And see, I learned those kind of things.
I guess that was the difference them days and today. Yeah. Today people shoot things for no reason. We never did kill anything just for the fun of killing something. When we killed an animal, we made use of it. You know, we didn't kill for the fun of it. We didn't kill just to, you know, when we go out and kill a deer, we made use of everything. My grandma used to tan the hide, and you know, you make different things out of whatever there's. Whatever you can use out of a deer, you use. Mm-hmm. You know, we didn't just shoot it and leave it there. You know, the meat was eaten. The meat was shared to everybody that was around. You know, we didn't just, not like today. Today you kill people kill something and they just leave it to rot. We never did that. I never seen anybody do that. When they killed something, they made use of it.
When you were, like, so people taught you, like by their example, when they would have you beside them. But did they also teach you through stories?
Oh, yes.
Oh, certainly. Oh, certainly. Yeah, a lot of it was done through stories.
Can you think of one? Can you think of one just off the top of your head?
Well, there was, like, stories for me, I guess, if you want to talk about it. Depends on what kind of story you'd like to, like we'd like to talk about here, I guess. It depends on, like, is it survival techniques or...
Well, there's all kinds of different stories, aren't there?
I know we just sit around and tell different stories, but there would be stories more or less about the importance of being a human being and being a Michif person, and the survival techniques was, and if we're talking, you know, of the hunt, you know, and like I know they used to tell us stories about buffalo hunt.
Oh, did they?
The stories of the buffalo hunt. Like my grandmother and grandpa used to tell me the stories of the buffalo hunt when I was just a kid, and they'd tell me how, you know, when they first started off on the buffalo hunt, they said it's not as simple as you think, because like you were saying, somebody had to know how to repair those carts.
Well, yeah.
And you had to know how to take care of those horses. You had to know how to tether those horses at night and those cows, and you had to keep them or those oxen, so they wouldn't wander off. And they had to eat also, so you had to take time to feed them at a certain time of the day, and that's when you broke up for camp. And that's when different things they would do, like they'd play games. The kids would have to have entertainment. And some people actually, you talk about daycare today, well, they had their own daycares. The elderly ladies took care of the kids. Those that couldn't do anything as part of the camp work anymore, they would take care of the kids. And the boys would take care of the horses. They would be the herders. They would take care of the horses, they'd take care of the cattle. And some people, if the harness broke down, there was somebody there that knew how to repair a harness. So those kind of things. And they also had to be very careful when you're on the hunt. In those days, it was, my grandfather used to say, it was the endangered times also, because there was other tribes, like they were out there that might come and attack you, or they might come and take your goods, you know. So if you've seen a wolf, it was not always a wolf. It was a man that was dressed as a wolf, and he was coming out to sneak and scout, and see where you were. So like those, we're talking about things of many, many years ago now. We're talking about the 1860s.
And
like,
you know,
like those.
You also had to know how to hunt buffalo. You don't just, you know, it's not as simple as just getting on your horse and chasing a buffalo and going right beside it and shooting it. Those buffalo could turn around and charge the horse, So you had to be very careful. You had to know how to do it. You don't just ride up to the buffalo and then shoot him. It wasn't that simple like they have on TV, I guess. You know, people had to know how to ride. They had no saddles, so you had to be able to ride a horse with no saddle. And, you know, hanging on with just your knees, pressing your knees on the horse, and then having your two hands free to shoot it. See, my auntie, Mrs. St. Pierre, well, Norman knows her. She's from Yorkton. She was a midwife too, But then we did have quite a few midwives around in Métis communities. But she was one of them. And she's one that you'd like to talk to, because she's got a lot of interesting stories. She's 90-some years old now, and you know, she really tells stories. I'm really interested in seeing her, listening to her tell stories.
You know, people never even thought about going to a hospital when they were going to have a baby. There was no such thing around home. They would just say, well, so and so is going to have a baby, so I'll be called over just about any time now. And true enough, there was a sleigh or a team of horses or somebody came and Grandma was gone. And they stayed with those women, had to stay in the bed in those days. They were taken care of for maybe 5-6 days. They wouldn't let them get out of bed. They were well taken care of. My grandma took care of those ladies really, really well.
That's better than they look after them in the hospital.
Yeah. And the kids, they never took their kids to the hospital. They say, well, go see that one. Yeah. You know, there's a doctor there, go see that one. He was Métis.
So you would know.
And one of the best that I've seen or heard of was a man by the name of Pierre. He was my uncle. He was a real good doctor. I took my kids there a few times.
Where did he get his medicines?
He was the 7th boy.
Oh, yeah.
And they call him
Oh, it's like a...
Yeah, that was he was.
Setchem.
And Setchem, they call him. That's what he said to Michif.
The seventh one was always gifted, eh?
Yeah, it was
Either
always gifted.
7 boys or 7 girls.
Yeah.
The seventh one was always gifted. And they never ever told you about it either.
No.
You had to go and ask them.
But he was the one that treated my kid. When my kid took sick and we couldn't get him to hospital because I didn't have the money, you know. So I was going to fix that doctor, but good, he would have needed a doctor himself when I got through with him. But they got me out of there, and Mom says, well, my mother said, let's take him to Alex.
You mean they wouldn't look after him?
They wouldn't look after him because we had no money.
They were going to turn you away?
Yeah, they did turn us away.
Really?
They did because we had no money.
Oh, that's awful.
And so we drove over there. We had to drive about 15 miles, I guess, out of town. And this was in the wintertime, though. You know, it was cold and the roads weren't so good. But we made it there. And when we got there, the old man was drunk. You know, he was drunk when we got there. So he said, that's okay. He said, don't worry about it. He said, and he was tagging around. He was preparing his medicine, eh? And he was trying to give it to him, and he wouldn't take it. Like he was just a baby, he wouldn't take it. You know, because I guess it tastes awful. Oh, he said, that's okay. He said, so he put it, he made the sign of the cross on her forehead with it. And then he took him to the other room. He took him to his bedroom. He come out, he says, in 15 minutes he'll be playing. You know, before we even got out there, he started playing. He started playing around.
That fast?
That fast. He told us in 15 minutes he'll be all right. He said, don't worry about it. It won't happen again. And it never did.
Wow, I wonder what he did.
And he was our...
Well, it was a mysterious thing.
Yeah.
And
you didn't know.
They didn't know, and you didn't try to find out.
No,
because
you
those
didn't try
were
to find out.
mysterious
That was,
things.
yeah. It worked, and that's all I worried about.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't care how he did it, as long as it worked.
See, Mrs. Tom Fleury, Leonore Cher was her name. She was the seventh, and she would do things also. Like, and there was another person too. I forget. This kid had a toothache, and she said, "Well, come here." So she just rubbed that kid, and the toothache was gone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just to touch?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know, he used to take me around, like when we're walking around, Alec, and he used to tell me all these, you know, you see some flowers, certain flowers, hey?
Yeah.
And he'd pick them. He said, this is medicine. Mm-hmm. You know how to mix this. This is good medicine. And for certain things, different kind of plants are for a different kind of sickness, eh? Mm-hmm. And he used to say this, but you got to mix it with something else. But he'd never explain what else you had to mix it with. Eh?
It was quite complicated, I think.
Oh, yeah, it was.
All
yeah,
what they knew,
yeah.
eh?
It was. Then you had to dig certain roads or certain plants that you had to dig up
Certain
and use the
time.
roads. Yeah, at a certain time.
Yeah, to be a botanist,
Yeah.
mostly, is what they were.
Yeah, I think so.
They were
knowledge,
botanists. You know, like my grandmother she'd tell us certain things about medicines. Like she'd say, le baume, you know, that mint, eh? There's le chibaume, le gros baume.
Yeah.
Meshkanaka was another one. That's for when women are having, women problems. And there was different medicines.
But le baume, that was very...
For the heart.
Yeah.
There was medicines
How
for
do
the
you
heart.
say that in English, le baume?
Just mint.
Mint,
Mint?
yeah, something, yeah.
And
That's still
then
right.
there's two kinds?
There's lip chibaume,
Yeah.
that's mush, and the muskeg.
Yeah, the muskeg,
you get that.
Yeah, the low. And the gros baume, it's more of a purple flower, and it grows taller.
On the higher ground?
On the higher ground. But another thing she'd tell us too is there was certain things that they did with medicines. You did things in odd number or even numbers. That's for stopping things, making things go.
Yeah, yeah.
And then when you're also, if you have, let's say you have a root and you wanted to make the blood flow, you'd scrape your medicines downwards, so that would make it flow. But if you were going to stop something, you scraped your medicines up.
The other way?
And it stopped it. So those are the kind of things.
So everything was part of it?
Everything was all a
your
circle
actions.
of wisdom. They knew the botany, and they knew not only that, but they also knew how to deal with Mother Nature, basically.
So 2 was to stop, and 3 was to get something...
Well, there was an odd number and an even number.
Odd number?
Yeah, and then there was the even number. They used those. When you were making your medicines, you'd put odd 3 of this and 3 of that and you'd put 2 of this and 2 of this and something else.
Oh, that would help you remember, too.
Yeah.
Right?
You see.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah.
Because everything was in the memory, nothing was written down.
Everything was, no, nothing was written down.
They never, my grandma couldn't read or write.
No.
She never went to school.
No, they didn't.
But it was
Same
just
as my
something you
uncle, he
learned
never
by
went to school
nature.
either.
It was something they learned by nature. But they were gifted again.
See, they didn't have to
Those-
write nothing
no,
down. They never
no,
did forget
no,
either. They
because-
wouldn't forget it. Like, if, you know,
They had
I
a
got to
memory
write
bank.
things. I got to write things down now, otherwise I forget it.
Yeah.
But they don't. They never forgot it.
No.
That's amazing, eh? All what they knew.
All what they knew,
Yeah.
and they knew a lot.
See, my grandmother told me that she learned a lot of her medicines. There was a lady, she was Cree, a Cree lady, a Cree medicine woman. And she taught my grandmother all these, the treatments.
Like took her
and,
on.
and how to treat, my grandmother, she cured tuberculosis. And she also cured many different ailments, you know. And it's sad that nobody actually took on, because in that community where you lived, there were so many people, Métis people in the community. Some person would have been a potential follower if they were taught, and some of them were gifted. They actually were born with like this. That's
They
that
were-
gem.
yeah.
It's that gem.
Yeah, they were born with it. They
What-
weren't.
You know, but some people actually had the potential. Like, not everybody was a good midwife, and they didn't even attempt to be or pretend to be, because you were either or you weren't.
I guess.
Yeah.
You had to be able to play the role, and if you didn't, the lives of those people were in danger. Like, you didn't pretend. Like, it was too much of a sacred thing, and it also.
And was there any protocols around storytelling and learning to tell stories? Like there is in First Nations tradition, did you recall?
Well, if you did exchange like gifts, we never were made aware of it. Like, if you were always supposed to be sharing and giving. You didn't just do it for specific reasons in the Michif world, especially where I grew up. Like, if Grandma and Grandpa or whomever thought you deserved a story, or something that really they shared and they would cherished and they would share it with you, it's because you deserved it. You know, they would know to share with you. Like, if you brought Grandma and Grandpa's wood in, for instance, or you did certain things, those were some of the protocols. Like, if you went and got some wood that day together, or you went hunting with them, or trapping, or doing something with Grandma, and she felt that she should share something with you, and there was a need, it was based on a need, that's when they'd actually do it. Like a bedtime stories.
Okay.
You know, and those kind of things. But you had to deserve those kind of things too. Like, I mean, if in terms of protocol, people just didn't give you anything just out of the blue. It was something that they wanted to share with you, and it was part of the teaching.
Yeah, and I think it was the same for us as well. It was the same for just about all over, wherever the Michif communities were. You know, the same thing went for us as well.
So if someone felt that a child had earned a story, or the occasion sort of required
Fit the bill,
yeah. And then plus it, did you find that the stories were also used to create bonds within the family? That when storytelling was a way of sort of making family? Do you know what I mean?
Well, I think it did.
Oh, yes.
It really did. You know, it really bonded families together, all these storytelling. Because a story meant something. It always had to mean something. You know, it wasn't just a story. They didn't just tell a story for the sake of telling a story. You know, it had a meaning.
There was always a reason.
There was always a reason behind it.
When you were little, did you always know the reason behind it, or did that come to you
Well,
later?
no, that came later. No, when we were just young kids, that we were just interested in
Right.
listening. You know, that, because I was always interested in stories, regardless who told them. You know, especially stories about years ago, way in the past, that things that happened. I was always interested in that.
It was entertainment. It was
Yeah.
a form of entertainment. But I think, I know with my experiences, and even with myself today, you never invent stories, or you never try to invent or create an environment or an atmosphere. And in order to do that, there has to be a special time in your mind and your heart.
Yeah.
And then it'll come out, it'll flow.
And it just sort of
It just
happens.
comes out. Like, I can't just go and talk about something just like that at the spur of the moment. There's got to be, you'd call it an atmosphere. It's got to be the right time. It's got to be prime.
Mm-hmm.
And then you talk about things. It's like talking about, for instance, at home with my mom and her sisters. They would talk about different things, but their healing and their wellness was each other. Like, I could see those ladies, they'd cry together, and it was normal. It was totally acceptable. Nobody says, what the hell are they crying for, and stuff. Nobody, it was part of our growing up. It was the way, that was part of their healing. And they would say, kiamato, sa pranchat ashtawehaman makai, datu kerkashtek, you gotta, like putting a fire out, whatever's in your heart, you gotta learn to heal, and we were like, that was part again of, I guess, psychiatry. They were therapists. That was our therapy, and that's how they did it at home. That's how they healed when they were hurt.
See, that's what I
The crying was an emotional time, and you had to cry because that was in you, and you had to get that out because that was a load that was there and it was in your way. You had to get it out of your mind, and people were willing to talk about things more in those days.
Yeah.
Open.
Oh yeah. They were more
At the
open.
dinner table was a right place.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Around,
Or
like when you're
together, or in the evening, or if you were just visiting. If you were playing cards, they might just joke. That night will be all a joke night.
Yeah.
It'll be just joke night. Another night, somebody will be, and they'd stop and say, something's bothering me, I'd like to talk to you about it. And that's when it would come out. You see, those were the kind of things, you could not invent those kind of things.
No.
There was a purpose was there for that time and place. I remember those times were there. And I remember another thing that they do is when they were singing songs, like at certain occasions, and those songs brought back memories, and some of them would laugh, some would cry. And that was all the time of the therapy. As the therapy they were doing, it was a healing process. We talk about healing today. Well, that's how people healed. That was their wellness. Like, that was the way they worked. So, like, I mean, when you talk about protocol, or we're talking about protocol here, that was sometimes those kind of things occurred at the special time, eh?
but it couldn't be predicted,
No.
and you couldn't sort of create it artificially.
No, because it wouldn't work.
It wouldn't.
It was just sort of when the occasion, was right, when that person felt like speaking, or when that story was appropriate.
Yep, exactly.
I would think too that as if you describe yourself both as as children interested in learning about history and interested about time before, that the adults then would have known that you were interested in learning about the past, and so when they would see you, they would have maybe a story that they would be ready to pass on to you, because you'd see that interest. So you're the student and they're the teacher. This one wants to learn our history, so then we're going to teach this one.
See, I noticed the old people at home didn't fool around. They had no time of the day for you. If you're just going to take their time and fool around, they didn't want you there.
Oh, is that right?
Don't away.
Yeah.
But if they knew you were interested, especially the older people, they would open up and share with you. If they knew that this person is interested and this person will learn from what, they were more than willing to share.
How would they know?
They seem to sense it.
Well, they can sense it. They can sense when somebody's not serious.
Yeah.
And when somebody is serious, they can sense that.
So you
And I
would
think it's easy to tell.
show your respect,
Yeah. Yeah.
be helpful, like you talk about bringing in wood. Hauling water is one that I heard. You go and kind of work for that person, be good to that person, and then be rewarded with those teachings that you were demonstrating an interest.
Exactly, that's the word, that you're rewarding.
Yeah.
Yeah, they would reward you with something. Or I remember they would even feed you, eh?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Like if you were a little kid coming to their place, and they'd say, well,
Yeah.
put one of take a day with sugar sauce. he must be hungry, this little boy. Feed him. So they'd feed you whatever. It didn't have to be sweet. It could be anything that they had. But
whatever they had. Whatever they had. If all they had was bannock, that's what you'll get.
And tea.
That's all they had. Bannock and tea. If that's all they had, then that's what you'll get.
Yeah.
They give you whatever they had. They'll share with whatever they had.
So whenever people were together, like eating food, playing cards, or sitting around, visiting around, a fire or something, then that would probably be the time of the stories.
It would trigger off whatever was going to happen, transpire,
So you were saying that you wanted to talk a little bit about the language, or to explain the language?
Yeah, because as director of the Michif languages, and also a person that spoke this language, like we were talking about yesterday, I spoke Michif as a young man, as a young boy, as a child, but I always was curious about what was this Michif all about, because when we were kids, when I was a young person, we were les Michif. We weren't les Métis, or we weren't Métis. We were les Michif, and so I asked my grandmother. I said, "Nochum, kewa maga kapik shkwaya ka le krigi tuanan mag tande uchipaye kumalalang." Like I said, we call this Cree, but where does this language come from? And so she explained to me briefly. She said, "Well, nosham kawitamaten kayash le bon Dieu kiao gipak neo toutes sortes de nations tada sur la terre." She said, and kishtanan ki ushi wanan bon Dieu. Because kaushi waya kimiga wanan and lang. Chins tota doya, oya chins tota waya mina kimiga wanan malalang. Agon ma kishtanan ki debehtanan. Aish le bon Dieu qui pakit niga wanan. Tas la terre kishtanan. Tak shkogach ki waya ki pakitnan. Les Anglais qui pakit neon lang ki mi l'anglais je pik shkwet. Les Français oui sto qui pakit neon le français je pik shkwet. Et wa kakio que les autres nations tap shko les Sioux oui sto en Sioux pik shko. Les sautu pik shko. Les Cri pik shko. Ki anan Michif ki pik shko anan. So anyways, what she was saying is, when God created man, He gave them a language also. When He created the English people, He gave them English was their language, and French, the French people, who spoke French. But when He created us, He also gave us a language. So she looked at our language as a God-given language, a spiritual language, and that's our Michif language. But also with other Michif, other Métis people, they spoke, they were very diverse in different languages. Like they spoke different languages. But those languages don't belong to us. The Soto, if you speak Soto, it don't belong to you. It belongs to the Soto people or the Ojibwe people. If you speak Cree, it don't belong to you. It belongs to the Cree people. And that's what, in essence, she was saying, that this belongs to us. Mm-hmm. This is ours. It was given to us by God as a new creation, as a new nation. So I always looked at Michif as a God-given spiritual language. It's something that belongs to the Métis people. We could say it's ours.
And something that nobody can take away from you.
Your special language?
Yes.
Did people speak about the language when you were
certainly
growing up?
The same way.
Same way?
Yeah.
That it was special?
Yeah. It was special, and it was yours. It was your own language. That you couldn't give it away. Nobody can take it away from you. That was yours.
And it's very, so enriching, and it's very emotional when you talk about something like that, because you're talking about your ancestral right. You're talking about a right that you have culturally, traditionally, as a new people. And a lot of people, I think, when we talk to different people, they try to invent something about we, the Métis people, and what was our lifestyle and who we were. Well, when I grew up, and where I grew up in St. Lazare, Manitoba, close to a very enriching community of a rich culture, and St. Madeleine wasn't too far away, and Fort Ellis. And in Saskatchewan, we had relatives in Saskatchewan also, and we were pulled together by our culture. There was no such things as boundaries. Like Saskatchewan didn't separate us or any other provinces.
No,
There was no such thing. Or the States. The relatives were in the States also. And our language was the strongest thing that made the bonding between us. Even though I never knew Gilbert ever in my whole life, as soon as we met, we had a bonding because we had something that was very common. It was our language.
Yeah,
as soon as I said, Tanche, and I'd say to him, Nishtao, or I might even say Mokozan.
Yeah.
And there's no relation.
No.
But we were powerful, and the relationship was so strong.
Because of language?
Yeah, because of the language.
And my brother-in-law, he'd be my brother-in-law, he'd be my Nishtao, or he would be Mokozan, or...
Yeah, my cousin.
You know, and mon frère, you know, my brother. And those are the kind of things that were very, very powerful at home. My mom, to this day, there's not many left now, but she's 101 years old. But I remember when her first cousins come to visit, they would be ma sœur and mon frère, like my brother and my sister. And so, that was very enriching. That kept us together. And it also, it made you very conscious of your family, the family tree. And there was no incest involved also, because the relationship of family was so powerful. You were told that's your cousin. You don't go with your cousin. You don't marry your cousin. And those were, again, another teaching that was very powerful. And you made sure, and it also was to do with respect, very much so. And all the older people, they were nochkom and the moshom. Even if you weren't related to them, it was moshom and nochkom.
Yeah, because of the age difference. If there was, they're that much older, you had respect. So you call them grandma and grandma, grandma and grandpa, moshom, nochkom.
You said the same?
Yeah.
Ma tante, or monok.
Yeah.
Even if you weren't related.
Yeah, even if you weren't related.
If I met Gilbert and his dad and mom were there, I called them right away ma tante or monok.
For respect?
Yeah.
Right.
Even
like
though there's no relation.
Yeah.
And like you said, we call each other cousin or brother when we meet each other. And that was as soon as we met each other, because we had that special thing between us. It's the language.
It was also in the family, Like my grandma, like her older brothers and sisters, there's a special word in our language. It's, they would say nimish, which is an older sister.
Okay.
Okay. And Nishdesh is my older brother. And then if you talked about my younger, you'd say Nishimish. You see, it would be my little one, my younger one. And that's how they looked at the family lineage. And it also was for respect. And they would say mo tete too. That was something else. They'd say tete would be somebody older than you. And you use that more. But I know with my grandmother, especially my mom's mother, I learned a whole lot of who I am and what I'm about as a Métis person. And I still refer to those, although they're not used every day like we used to. It was something that was. But if she'd talk about her brothers and sisters, she'd always use that nimish or nishdesh or nishimish. And because they were older than her and younger. And that was for respect again, to respect your older. And they had, the older brothers and sisters also had certain responsibilities as older brothers and sisters in the family. Like if you lost your mom and dad, those people, those older brothers and sisters, if they were old enough, would take on the family. They would become your parents. And then being Catholic, your godparents, they made an oath.
So that's who would raise you?
That would raise you. They took that oath right away. Because I remember when I was a kid, they said, well, skate tenchig tani koma pel parai wiyan and bedouin maren sa prach mjuk shnam wa cheko ke katakona ke les enfants dans l'église chrétienne le bon Dieu qui tao ci urpiki ha cheko ke gotek les enfants qui spin one hat o mama o papa o mana kito kia wa shkotam ci gone ma chek kon ke les enfants.
I wonder when do you think people started speaking Michif? How old do you think it is?
Well, if you look at the language itself, for instance, my mom's going to be 102.
Right.
Her parents were born in 1873. They spoke it. And her grandparents, who were born in 1840, spoke it. So that tells you right there that it's a very old language.
It was around for a while.
It's been around
For a while, yes.
Yeah. You know, and 100 years is a long time, even if you just look at 100 years.
And you know, we used to be known as half-breeds, you know, but our Métis today, they knew each other as Michif.
Yeah.
Not Métis, they were not Métis, they were not half-breeds, they were Michif.
That's what they called them?
And they'd say, well, you know, li Michif and they tell me no week walk. They tell you Michif can do Kilkoana. You know, we'll go visit these Michif out there. But they all call themselves Michif, and they ask them what language they speak Michif. Michif, Krieg, Schwana, that's just the
Krieg maga big schwaach maak spel vrij Krieg. Le Français ta kustaan dort nat lang avec le Krieg kito ma. Maga dit kito ga Michif big schwaach maak le Krimina. Shigito. But nie nano je nie genaka. Mask but stag mal Krieg big schwaach. We talk Krieg to mana. Yeah, this we speak Michif, but now more and more it's you relate your language with your nationality.
Yeah, with your nationality.
And that's Michif, you see, and that's how that became about. And there's another person, actually, her name is Nicole Rosen. She's from Winnipeg. And it's the first time ever in the history of Canada that somebody other than another country has taken time to do their PhD on Michif, and I'm her consultant. And she goes to the University of Toronto. She's in Ottawa right now. And she's doing her PhD on Michif, and she's a Canadian. So that's another milestone in history for the Michif language. So there's a lot of people that are interested, especially the scholars, and a lot of people, the historians, and more our Canadian heritage is starting to realize that this nation that we've never did much or had much to do with have very much to offer. And they're part of the Canadian, the flag, and being Canadians. They were here, they've been here, they did this. These are their contributions, and now they want to know. And it makes me happy to know that I'm one of those people that had that rich culture and rich history in the language.
Well, what I find is that so much of the, like just listening to you over the last little while, so much of the, you can really see when people talk about how the culture is in the language, is in the stories, and just in the, like the ways that language was used every day, how you would refer to other people. It's like the important values. You can really, you can really see that, how much that this was passed on in terms of how you conduct yourself, what is considered good and bad, what is considered a good life or a bad life, and the way social control, but also respect, and just everything was passed on through the language. So when you start moving away from that.
And they also had a governmental structure, like similar to what they had with Louis Riel and his government. And that remained with our people. They had a structure. And it was passed on from the laws of the hunt and just the laws of the government, and that remained in the homes. Like there was respect in the homes, and people took pride in who they were years ago. Food was a big part because not everybody had the richness of having food. So let's say you had just butchered something, or you went hunting, and you'd give them something in return. Those are the kind of gifts that we gifted each other with. Right. That was more of survival. Eh?
And I think it meant something. You know, it really meant something to get something from someone who went out and got it. You know, this wasn't given to him. He had to go out and, you know, he had to go. He had to walk for that. He had to work for it. You know, so I guess it means more to give something that you really earned yourself.
Yes.
Instead of, you know, to have to go buy it and give it. It's so simple just to go buy something today and give it, you know, give it as a... But these people worked for it. They really had to work to to give that thing, and yet they gave it away. They used to give horses, and horses meant a lot to them because that was their only mode of travel. You know, and they still gave them away to... And they had a lot of... I remember we cut brush with an axe, you know, 5 acres of bush, and you can imagine how big 5 acres is today, and you try to get in there with an axe and cut it when trees were about like that.
Oh, that's right.
You know, and all you had was an axe, and we did that, and we'd pile the branches and pile the wood and burn the branches afterwards. You know, and that was and we had to do that, and my dad used to work for horses and cows.
That's how you get paid? That's
how you get paid. And he'd give it away, you know, as a gift to someone that came from a long ways or someone who he hasn't seen for years. And he'd give them, you know, he'd work hard for it, and so he just gave it.
See, the horse and the rifle were a significance of survival, and those were the most powerful gifts.
Those are the most powerful things that you can give away because that meant your life. You know, a horse, you needed a horse to travel, and you needed a gun or a rifle to survive, to get your food.
So for a man to give another man
it really meant something, you know.
And they gave things away, but then one thing that if you gave a knife to somebody, it wasn't good. You don't give a knife. You can give them, but they have to buy it. They have to pay you for it. Because there's a danger, the sharpness.
Yeah.
And it could mean danger. So if you gave somebody a knife, they gave you something in return. It could be a pin, it could be a penny. They gave you something. So you had to exchange there when you gave anything sharp away.
So that had to be like, a trade.
Because you can hurt somebody, you see. It could be bad luck. You can
fall
on it.
Yeah.
You know, it could injure you. And that was the significance.
But a gun was not looked at the same way.
The gun was the same way. Because it was a different way. It was survival. It was for hunting and stuff. So there was different things.
It would have been pretty hard to try to kill a deer with a knife.
Yeah.
Yes, I think so.
You know, it would be a little difficult to do that, and I think it...
And it was used for skinning and stuff like that. And, you know, there's a lot of things we can talk about the survival of the Métis people when we're talking about things like that. Now, I remember my grandfather telling me he could build a house in just about a day or 2 days. Like he would have a house built, logs. There was nothing fancy. You wanted to build yourself a home, and you squared those logs. It would take longer. But if you just put them together and, you know, as a log house, just put the logs together. But you had to cut them a certain way at the end, so they'd fit properly. And you know, they never used no nails.
No, they just...
Because it's just the way they sat.
Yeah.
So
sod
roof. And the girls or the boys and the mothers and the grandmas would make with the plaster.
They mixed the mud. The kids usually would mix mud too, you know, because they...
Is that what they put on the outside?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I used to live
on the inside as well. They put it on the inside
also. And then whitewash it.
What did you call what you put inside there?
Chinking.
Was there a word for it in Michif?
Oh, the bousiller. Le bousiller, or la beau. You see, it comes from the word la beau. Qu'il bousille ou la maison, elle bousille, and that's when you take it, plaster it, and then just smooth it off.
And
you had mentioned that there was that weddings and food, when love and food go together, and that food seems to go with a lot of special occasions in the old Michif way of life. What were some of those special foods? Like we talk about les boulettes.
Les boulettes, la galette.
La galette.
The tarte, the patak. Di sayum, you know, di suchem. asquesti karat.
What's the last part? Didn't get the last.
Well, turnips,
Turnips.
carrots, potatoes, meat pies, and if you had roasts of any
Boulette,
kind, boulette, like meatballs,
Wild game.
wild game, deer, and but they'd also do things like making those special kind of cakes. And
Oh, yes, yeah.
See, those
Molasses.
molasses cake was one of the favorite cakes, and it was a traditional Michif cake. And like I said, some people made the 3-tier cakes, and you had to sing for those, for
To
the
sing.
cake, to get some cake. But they also had, you call them les grands-pères, which are really a dumpling. And they had those also. At some of the occasions, especially New Year's. New Year's was the one you really cooked, eh?
This minute it's a galette of racette.
Yeah.
What they call baking powder biscuits with
Oh, yeah,
raisins.
yeah.
Them small bannock with raisins, eh? That was a kind of a
And
treat.
then,
A treat.
then if you were again, it was seasonal food.
it
like
was
when
seasonal
you
food, that's-
butchered in the fall,
Yeah.
like when you slaughtered animals, like you made blood sausage, le boudin, and then you also ate la panse. Well, that's whenever when they were butchering in the fall, you'd have le boudin, les tripes,
All right, that's.
La panse.
la panse, and you'd
Stuff?
have les débris,
Débris, yeah.
What's that?
Les tripes, les grosses tripes à
What's what?
Les tripes,
Le débris,
le débris.
that's
yeah.
the entrails, that's the inside.
the insides of an animal,
like
the inside of a
organs,
cow.
the internal organs.
Okay, like the heart,
The heart and
kidneys.
the kidneys and the liver.
Okay.
And those were very, very popular items at the table.
People be fighting over the.
Yeah. And there was also a procedure, like I remember at home that they would, like if Grandpa was going to be butchering, my grandma would ask her, either the kids, her daughters, or somebody else to come to help, because it was a big day. The full day was taken
Yeah.
because you had to do everything. You didn't go and buy your, what do you call that, casings, like intestines, from a store. Like you took them right from the animal.
You have to clean it.
then
and
you
all
have
that.
to
Clean
it
it
yourself,
procedures. And also you had to go there when they did the slaughtering. You had to know how to take the blood.
Yeah.
And they put salt in this pail or whatever so the blood wouldn't clot. You had to keep stirring it. And then they'd bring actually the whole tub of the entrails in it. And the
whole
ladies
thing.
would go, my grandma used to go through that and take a certain casing you used. You didn't use the big casing. You used a smaller casing for making blood sausage.
Oh, the one that's really long.
The small one, long.
Yeah.
That's what they used. And then they had to turn it inside out, and they had to clean it. There was a whole procedure, a whole process, and that was very important to do. And then with the animal, again, you had to know what to do with it, how to cut it up, and how to butcher it. And there's certain ways they used water. You had to boil the water, get the barrel ready, and the men, that was their job.
That was their job.
And the ladies had their job in the house. And then they start making this pork rind, ligorton.
Yeah.
They rendered their own
lard.
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 So the lard was rendered from the pork.
What would you store it in?
They had their own containers, licorice or
Cans even.
you
Put some in cans, yeah.
Les cannes de jam
Les cannes de sirop.
sirop,
Yeah,
shisha,
yeah.
but stout. But don't ke wine higa ki ya chikli Christian higa ki
Christian artist.
vitne lips ke ya kon hemina.
This would make quite a bit, wouldn't it?
Oh yeah. Well, it depends. In those days,
depends
they
how much
when they
how much you butchered.
slaughtered too, they
Oh,
did
yeah.
bigger animals, eh? And it was the same thing with the cow. Like my grandfather, actually, well, I call him Grandpa, but he was my grandma's brother, and he was the butcher in the community. So it was just a story, though. But this is kind of they made a joke out of it, but. And actually, it wasn't a joke. It was what they did. His wife used to take all the big intestines of the animal when he butchered the steer or cow or whatever, and they would dry them and hang them out and dry them. And they were nice big guts hanging on the clothesline. So this guy drove by going to church, and he seen those guts hanging there, and he said, my God, that old man must spend a lot of money buying nylons for his daughters. You know, like he thought they were actually, the nylons were white in those days. And so it was sort of kind of a joke, but it did happen.
Yeah.
Like they had them there. And the lady used to cut all those up, and they would boil them with potatoes and different vegetables, and broth was so good for you.
Yeah.
Like it was a medicinal. Like broth was very medicinal. And anything they'd boil, like deer especially, and most of the food was boiled in those days. Like there was some roast, but most of everything was boiled.
Oh, one of the things that you had mentioned was some of the nicknames that people had. Can you think of, were the nicknames in English or Michif or everything?
They were all Michif
All
nicknames
Michif?
pretty well.
Yeah.
They were all Michif. Most of them were Michif nicknames. You know, that English wouldn't, you wouldn't understand them in English.
And the nicknames, I think it's sort of a universal thing. Like it's a universal, it's a cultural thing, because I think most ethnic groups that I know have nicknames. Today they'll have nicknames for certain hockey players or ball players, or kids will give each other nicknames. But in those days, they really describe that person. A lot of times they would use names to describe that individual or things that might have happened or something. But for some reason, somebody would give you a nickname. Like somebody in the family would give you a nickname. All of a sudden, you had a nickname. Like
and it
I
would
know
stick
that
with you.
It would stick with you.
Give me some examples from where you're...
Well, like this one person, we knew him and he's gone now, and
we can
he
talk
had the
about
name
him?
like Galette. No, he's passed on actually, and his name had the fin in the pool.
Yeah.
You know, and Galette was his nickname. Well, he might have said to Grandma or his mom all the time, asked for Gabanik. You know.
Yeah, I
so
heard
they'll
his
say,
nickname was
well,
Bannock.
Galette Schnechka.
Because he always
wanted Bannock.
Yeah.
Wanted Bannock. So there's different reasons. Like they would give him danseur, or somebody who went dancing a lot, liked to dance. They would call him maybe jiggeur. There was a man called Jiggeur. Jiggeur was his nickname. This guy. So he probably was a jigger. You know.
What are some from...
But Le Chien and Dog, they weren't. I guess they weren't the first time they went to Edmonton, the big city. And well, they were able to read and write a little bit, eh? And there was a sign there that says no dogs allowed. They were going to go into this cafe and eat. And they said, no dogs allowed. Well, we can't go in here. Well, we're not allowed in here. It says, cause one of them was named Le Chien, which means dog too. Eh? One of them was named Dog. So they weren't allowed to go in that cafe. He was laughing at himself because that was his nickname, eh? That was just their nicknames. One of them was Gilbert and one of them was Alex, I think, eh? Alex and Gilbert. Wasn't that their name? Their real name?
I think so, yeah. We came out, but I only knew
And a lot of these people, like that's the only way. That's the only way I know is by their nickname. I don't know. Queda. That's Queda's brother, Dog.
Yeah, Dog. Yeah.
So what was the first name?
And then my family, they had Chitfi and Kodi, Po.
Po.
That could have been Laos or Skin. I don't know. That was my nickname, Po. They used to call me Po. And there was Chigila was my brother, and an old lady gave him that name, Chigila. See, it was again older people that gave you that name.
And ours was my older brother's name was Pujem, and my younger brother was Mervyn, his real name, but they called him Chiman.
Oh, Chiman.
Chiman.
Yeah, that's a common one.
Yeah, that's a common name, Chiman. And they called him that. That's just nickname Chiman.
Stom was one of my cousins too. Stom. It was Chibili. Baker was one of my brothers. He's gone now, but my mom tells me any time she'd bake, he was there, so she called him Baker. That was his nickname. And there was and some of them didn't have nicknames.
See, I knew this lady, Ducky. I don't know her real name. That's the only way I knew her was Ducky. Well, you know her real name.
Yeah.
I don't know her real name. But that's the only way I know her is Ducky. Yeah. And I knew her for a long time.
Everybody knew her as that.
Yeah, Ducky, that was her nickname. And her sister's name was Bizoy. And what was the other one? Kachan.
Well, do those translate?
Well, they got them somehow. We don't know, like Bizoy.
Bizoy, I don't know what
or
that
Kachan.
I don't know what does Bizoy mean. I don't even know what it means.
It's just a nickname.
It's just a nickname. Yeah.
But
Fleury.
chi means small, eh?
It's little.
Yeah.
But my
Yeah.
sister, they called her in English, my oldest sister, her name was My Girl. And it always stayed. People
That is-
knew her as My Girl. No, it was
How do you say that?
Chitfi
Chitfi?
or Muffy, you see.
Oh, Muffy.
But it's My Girl, and her name was in English.
Muffy is my girl.
Yeah. And Marie de Gaulle was one of them. And they had just different names. But I remember
And
one of
Mom.
our sisters, we used to call her Tete. One particular sister, we called her Tete, was our oldest sister. But that was the way you used to, actually that was the word that you used. But as far as nicknames go, there was a lot of nicknames.
Oh, yeah.
And
Enom, that means a man, eh? One of them back home, that was his nickname, Enom. And his sister, they had some company. And they said, oh, Enom Peal. That means he's coming, like Enom is coming. His name was Joe, his real name was Joe. But his nickname was Enom.
so they figured
You
something
know, they
strange was
figured
coming.
a man was coming, eh? Because Enom is a man. And this guy looked out, he says, where? I don't see no man coming, you know, because you were just a young kid.
Yeah.
Now, what are you doing now when you're looking sort of forward to things that you can do to preserve the stories or the teachings and the language? You're involved in different
I'm
things.
teaching my grandchildren the language, the Michif language, you know, and they're anywhere from 2 years old, well, not even 2 years old, to 22, 24 years old, and I'm teaching them to speak the language, and you know, and I'm telling them, never be ashamed of who you are. You are who you are. You're Métis, so never be ashamed of it. And I don't care where I am or how many people I'm with, I'll always admit who I am, and I'll always admit my traditional foods. You know, I'm not ashamed of it.
Speak your language.
I'm not ashamed to speak my language. It's my language. Why should I be ashamed of it? You know, if I'm in the white world, there's nobody else but the white. They're not ashamed of their language. Why should I be ashamed of mine?
Do you think that's why people stop speaking it tartly?
A lot of it, I think that's what it is. They're ashamed to speak their own language. And a lot of it because we weren't allowed to speak our own language in school.
So the Michif were also not allowed to speak their language?
We were not allowed to speak our language. When I went to school, we weren't allowed to speak our language. I don't know about Norman, but we weren't allowed to speak our language in school.
Well, it wasn't
And yet it was
acceptable there because
no.
they spoke only English, and if we tried, we wouldn't even, nobody
Yeah.
would listen to us. Like, you
No.
know. So, like, it was, and you always had to be, I think, like I was always an advocate of the people, the Aboriginal people, the First Nations people, the Métis people. I've always been sort of like a teacher to teach people that are not aware of our culture. Even our own people are not aware of themselves and such a rich heritage that we have that we don't have to borrow somebody else's. We've had our own rich culture. If we abide by our rules, our regulations, and what our forefathers gave us, we have so much richness in our lives and part of our culture. So I've always been a teacher. Like I live in the community where it's mainly Anglo-Saxon people in that area, but they've lived by reservations or reserves.
Yeah.
And they're not. And one particular person didn't even realize that those were Dakota people. They were Sioux people. He thought they were Crees. That's how much interest. Like there is racism.
Yes, there is.
And there is. We can't say there is no racism. Another thing we have to do as Métis people, we have to tell other people that, look, we don't live on reserves, and we don't have these rights, and we don't have this, because people are still thinking that we get things for nothing. And there's no such thing as you receive anything for nothing. Like I know where we live, when I bought cattle and horses, and I bought land, people in that area, and this friend of mine, who is not a Métis person, he told me, he said, you know, people around here, he says, I've straightened them out because they said, well, Norman got that land for nothing. And somebody came to my wife at the school, she teaches school, and this person said, you're kind of lucky, aren't you? And she says, well, what do you mean? Well, your husband, doesn't he get all those things that you got for nothing? And she says, listen here, my wife's not a Métis person. She says, Norman has a number, same as you, and that's a social insurance number. And he pays all his dues like everybody else, and that land is on Norman and Ruth's name. It's nobody else's name. We pay our taxes. We pay all our dues. So there's just, you call that ignorance, or, you know, it's people that don't know their culture. And I remember one person that I was talking to said, well, this man over here, he's a Métis, he's got his number now. And I said, what do you mean his number? Well, you know, that number, the treaty number. I says, look, he's a Métis. I says, he hasn't got a treaty number. It's a Métis card which identifies him with a certain local in a certain region belonging to the organization. That's basically what it is. It's a membership card. So you see, we have a lot of work to do. We have to tell people who we are as Métis people. What's the significance? Like, what do we represent? And it's with pride that I do that.
A lot of people don't realize that we pay taxes like everybody else, eh? Yeah. Like, we pay our taxes too like everybody else. We buy something, we got to pay taxes. We don't get things for nothing. We go to the store, buy something, buy clothes or something, we got to pay our taxes. We go buy a car, we got to pay taxes on that car as well, you know, as well as anybody else. But they'll say, oh, there's this guy that's spending our tax dollars.
Mm-hmm. All right, that's the perception.
You know? That's the perception. We got to change it, and there's an awful lot of work to do that, because there's so many people out there that, you know, want to look at you and say, well, here's where our tax dollars are going. Look at the car that guy's driving, you know.
So you see that as part of it. So part of it is trying to preserve the traditions, but also always addressing that ignorance and racism, so that people are feeling better.
But you got to do it in. You've also got to do it not with anger. You've got to do it. You know, it is tough, but I mean, I've learned to overcome. As a matter of fact, this lady, which was an older person, told me, your criticism that you receive, take it positively and use that as strength. Yeah. And that's what I did. I used all the negativeness as strength. And it's good, because you don't turn to foreign things such as alcoholism. You don't turn to drugs. You just keep going. You use your spirituality. You use your good upbringing and your morals and standards in life, and that keeps you going straight and your head above water. I know Mom still says today, keep your head up. Don't go around walking with your head down. Yeah. Be proud.
Be proud of who you are.
You know? And that's what you have to do.